Okay, how will private and homeschools be affected? Well, David Coleman was one of the two people who wrote the English language arts standards, and he is commonly known as the architect of Common Core. He's never taught English and never written standards before. He is now the president of the College Board, and so he is using his position there to align the SAT to the Common Core. And ACT tells us that they have not yet aligned, and they say our test has not changed. So if your child is taking the ACT, I would say that's a good thing. Don't take SAT. You know, I'm not telling you what to do. You can do what you want to, but the SAT is being, and it's already been dumbed down. For example, they've gotten rid of the hard vocabulary words. Because after all, you know, if you're at in your entry-level job, you don't have to know hard vocabulary words. Let's just use the words that people actually use, right? So this is David Coleman's idea. But this is what I hear, and I was talking with a archdiocesan education supervisor. We had a very lengthy conversation about why the archdiocese was adopting Common Core, or she said adapting, not adopting. And it came down ultimately to, well, the SAT is going to be aligned to it, so we got to do it. And I said, really? The Catholic schools have to follow testing companies off a cliff? Yeah. What happened to being freeborn Americans and doing what you know is the right thing to do rather than just doing what's expected under the way it is? Let's change the way it is. If people stop taking the SAT, they'll get their act together and they'll start doing it the right way. But that fell on deaf ears. All right. One quote that I found interesting, this comes from Michael Cohen, who was the head of Achieve, one of the players in all this. He testified in New York last year, and he said the full effects of the Common Core won't be seen until an entire cohort of students from kindergarten through high school graduation has been effectively exposed to Common Core teaching. That's 13 years, ladies and gentlemen. So we're going to try this for 13 years. And by the way, I said the English standards were experimental. They've decided to just, you know, expose kids to all this nonfiction stuff, and then they'll become better readers. That they'll become better readers and more interested in reading by reading boring stuff than by reading interesting, you know, great stories. That seems counterintuitive to me, but maybe it makes sense to other people. But the math stuff has been tried. In California 20 years ago, they did this exact math, and it was such a disaster, and they abandoned it. And they went to the best math standards in the nation, and it worked. It worked. They were doing very well in math, and then they decided to go for race to the top money, so now they have Common Core. Okay, so let's look at just kind of the big picture for a little bit, because there's some things that it's taken me a while to figure out, and so I'm going to do my best to explain what it took me a long time to figure out. There are all these things going on, you know, we've got loss of control, and the national curriculum is coming because standards drive curriculum. They can say all they want to, this is just standards, it's not curriculum. The curriculum will be determined by the standards, it will be determined by the assessment, and you are locked into both. It is outcome-based education, diminished literature. There is, if you look at Appendix A connected to the English Language Arts Standards, Appendix B, look at some of the books that they suggest. And they're not mandated. I'm not saying they're mandated. But then the proponents will also say, well, look, the Constitution is there, but it's not mandated either. But these books are there that are, believe me, and we've heard from teachers who have been given these books and told to teach them, and they've said, I'm not doing this with 15-year-olds. Workforce development, the fuzzy math, we're back to that, dumbed down math. All right. What does this mean? Because you will hear over and over and over again that these standards are rigorous. We've got to have rigor. And they will teach students critical thinking and their deeper learning. Okay, and that sounds good, right? You know, if you tell your local chamber that you know, you're going to have workers who know all this stuff, doesn't that sound great? But the definitions are different. For example, when I think of rigor, when I think of a high school course or whatever that is rigorous, I think, all right, this is a course that is going to require my child to work hard and know a lot, to study and learn a lot of stuff. Is that not what you think of when you think rigorous? That's not what they mean. Let me give you an example. And this comes from just all of the education reform stuff from the last 30 years. And believe me, ladies and gentlemen, there is a reason that all of the 60s terrorists, such as the Mr. and Mrs. Ayers, went into education schools. They became professors at ed schools because it's a very powerful position. They are now training the people who train our teachers. Educational expectations that are academically, intellectually, and personally ambiguous or contentious, and that encourage students to question their assumptions. That's what they mean by rigor. It means you don't give the child the answer, that he's got to wrestle with things and develop the appropriate mindsets to do this. That's what they mean by rigor. That's not my definition of rigor. I have a friend who wrote a book called Credentialed to Destroy: How and Why Education Became a Weapon. And she has studied this for years, and she, as she says, she speaks fluent educationese. And she's been reading about all the reform people who are behind Common Core. And this is what she said about rigor. Rigor is about what a student feels, perceives, and does when there is no single correct answer, or there are insufficient facts stated to reach a definite conclusion, or when asked about material that has never been taught. It provides superb behavioral science data on likely future actions, and it primes students to be willing to act in the face of uncertainty.